Section 1. The listing appointment, where the transaction really begins. The listing appointment, where the transaction really begins. Sarah Mitchell pulls into the driveway of Mike and Jennifer Reynolds' Gilbert home a few minutes before 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. She feels prepared. She reviewed recent sales, studied the active competition, prepared a preliminary comparative market analysis, and has an entire presentation ready to explain how she plans to market their property. Mike opens the door before Sarah reaches it and says, "We're ready to sell. Tell us what it's worth, tell us what you charge, and let's get the sign in the yard." If you've worked with sellers for very long, you've probably heard some version of that sentence. But an experienced Arizona listing agent knows that getting a sign in the yard is not where a successful listing begins. It begins with understanding what you're actually being hired to sell. Before Sarah discusses price, she starts asking questions. She confirms how long Mike and Jennifer have owned the home and begins learning about improvements they've made during their 9 years of ownership. Mike proudly points out the remodeled kitchen, a replaced air conditioning unit, garage improvements, and the solar system. Sarah asks whether the solar system is owned, leased, or financed. Mike says, "I think we own it." Jennifer immediately responds, "No, we're still making payments." That's Sarah's first reminder that information provided during a listing appointment isn't always complete or even consistent. She doesn't pick the answer she likes better. She asks them to locate the solar agreement and account information. This is where listing agreements can be helpful teaching tools. There are many different listing agreements and brokerage forms, and this course is not suggesting that every Arizona brokerage or transaction uses the same agreement. Instead, look at listing agreements as examples of the questions agents need to think about. The updated Arizona Realtors Exclusive Right to Sell Rent Agreement, for example, addresses property identification, the listing term, compensation, fixtures and personal property, agency, marketing authority, seller obligations, and disclosure-related information. Another agreement, such as an exclusive agency listing, can establish a different arrangement between the seller and broker. The lesson isn't to memorize one form. The lesson is to understand the agreement your brokerage uses and know what you're asking your client to sign. Sarah continues her conversation. "Have you had any major repairs, water problems, insurance claims, roof problems, termite treatments, or anything else happen while you've owned the house?" Jennifer pauses before answering. "We had a roof leak during a monsoon about 4 years ago, but we repaired it." Then she adds, "Since it's fixed, we don't need to tell anybody about that, right?" Here's where many agents get into trouble. Sarah wants the listing, and she certainly doesn't want to alarm Jennifer. It would be easy to say, "If it's fixed, don't worry about it." But Sarah shouldn't make that determination. Arizona's licensee duty rule requires disclosure of certain information possessed by the licensee that materially or adversely affects consideration, including known adverse material facts concerning the property or material defects, and the existence of liens or encumbrances. The same rule requires reasonable care in obtaining information material to the client's interests and accurately communicating that information. So Sarah asks more questions. "Do you have the invoice from the roof repair?" Jennifer thinks she does. "Was there an insurance claim?" "Yes." "Do you know exactly what was repaired?" "Not really." Sarah writes that down. She isn't deciding whether the roof is currently defective, and she certainly isn't climbing onto it. She's recognizing that there is information worth gathering. That's a critical distinction. Recognizing a potential issue does not make the real estate agent responsible for diagnosing it. Sarah continues through the property and discovers that Mike and Jennifer may belong to two homeowners associations. Mike thinks their dues are about $150 per month, but Jennifer remembers paying something to a master association too. Sarah doesn't guess. She makes another note. Then they enter the remodeled kitchen. Sarah asks whether permits were required or obtained. Mike shrugs. "I have no idea." Another question to investigate. AAC R428-1101 does not require Sarah to become an expert in every technical field. It does require professional competence and reasonable care, including reasonable steps to help a client confirm relevant information. Then, Sarah notices a large television mounted to the family room wall, a video doorbell, smart thermostat, security equipment, and a water softener. "What's staying with the house?" she asks. Mike points to the television. "The TV goes with us." Sarah asks, "What about the wall bracket?" Mike pauses. "I hadn't thought about that." This may sound minor, but experienced brokers know how quickly a $50 bracket can turn into a surprisingly emotional disagreement at final walkthrough. The updated Arizona Realtors listing agreement is useful as an example because its fixtures and personal property provisions identify numerous items that can require clarification, including wall-mounted television brackets, smart home devices, security systems, water softeners, appliances, and solar equipment. Here's the practical lesson. Don't memorize the list. Learn why the list exists. If something could create different expectations between the seller and buyer, clarify it before it becomes a dispute. By the end of Sarah's appointment, she has identified a previous roof leak, an insurance claim, uncertain solar financing, possible multiple HOA obligations, remodeling questions, a possible old home improvement lien, and several fixtures that need clarification. None of those things automatically makes this a bad listing. In fact, discovering them now is much better than discovering them after the property is under contract. There is another reason Sarah wants accurate information before marketing begins. Arizona advertising rules require licensees to ensure advertising contains accurate claims and representations and does not create misleading impressions. If Sarah isn't certain the kitchen remodel was permitted, she shouldn't advertise fully permitted remodel because Mike thinks somebody probably obtained permits. If she doesn't know the solar status, she shouldn't advertise own solar. If the sellers aren't certain about the HOA dues, she shouldn't simply pick a number for the MLS. This is why experienced brokers tell their agents, when you don't know, don't guess. Ask the question. Gather the documentation. Verify what can reasonably be verified. Consult your designated broker when appropriate. Recommend another qualified professional when the issue falls outside your expertise. And remember one of the most valuable habits a listing agent can develop. Find the question at the listing table instead of finding the problem 3 days before closing. Mike looks at Sarah's growing list of notes and laughs. I thought you were coming here to talk about selling our house. Sarah smiles. I am. Then Mike points toward the paperwork on the table. Okay, so which listing agreement are we going to sign, and what does it actually mean? That's a very good question, because different listing agreements can create different rights and obligations. And your seller needs to understand the agreement being used. That's where we'll go next, in Section 2, Choosing and Understanding the Listing Agreement. 1. Mike believes the solar system is owned, while Jennifer says they are still making payments. What should Sarah do before marketing the property? Answer. Sarah should recognize that the sellers have provided conflicting information and seek documentation before making a specific representation. She can ask them to locate the solar agreement, financing or lease documents, and current account information. The important lesson is not to guess. Information concerning solar equipment may affect disclosures, marketing, negotiations, financing, and closing, so Sarah should work from reasonably verified information whenever possible. 2. Jennifer tells Sarah that a previous roof leak does not matter because it was repaired 4 years ago. How should Sarah approach the situation? Answer. Sarah should not automatically agree that the previous condition is irrelevant simply because it was repaired. She should gather information about what happened, whether there was an insurance claim, what repairs were performed, and what documentation may be available. Sarah should recognize the potential disclosure issue without attempting to diagnose the current physical condition of the roof. If technical expertise is needed, the appropriate qualified professional should address that question. 3. Why are different listing agreements being used as examples rather than teaching students to memorize one particular form? Answer. Brokerages and transactions may involve different listing agreements and forms. The important skill is understanding the concepts contained in the agreement actually being used, including the parties, property, term, compensation, agency relationship, marketing authority, fixtures, seller obligations, and disclosure responsibilities. Agents should follow their brokerage's policies and approved forms and be able to explain the agreement used in their particular transaction.